In 1993, a digital pandemic swept through corporate America. But it wasn't a computer virus, but a game so addictive that people overwhelmingly playing it crashed the computer networks at universities and major corporations. We're going to cover how a small team in Texas delivered on their promise and built the foundation of the modern gaming industry. Today, we're talking about DooM. The year is 1992. id Software's team, fresh off the success of Wolfenstein 3D and its prequel, Spear of Destiny, was looking for their next major project. Lead graphics engine developer John Carmack was already hard at work writing a new game engine that would surpass their previous technological achievements. While the team brainstormed themes, the primary influences that surfaced were the science fiction action of the movie Aliens and the horror comedy of Evil Dead 2. The title itself came from a specific scene in the film The Color of Money, where Tom Cruise reveals a custom pool cue from a case. When asked what he has in there, Cruise replies with a cocky grin, "DooM." Carmack viewed the upcoming game as a way to spring carnage on the industry, making the name a perfect fit. Development was a complex process of innovation and design conflicts. Tom Hall, one of the designers, wrote an elaborate document known as the DooM Bible, laying out detailed specifications for a rich narrative, multiple playable characters, and interactive features. However, the rest of the team, particularly Carmack, advocated for a simpler, more action-oriented design, leading to Hall's resignation. Visually, the game was a mix of digitized drawings and physical models. Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud created the dark, gritty art style, while Gregor Punchatz produced sculptures of the monsters from clay and latex, which were then digitized to create the sprites seen in the game. To complete the atmosphere, Bobby Prince composed a heavy metal and ambient soundtrack, with riffs closely mirroring popular rock songs from bands like Alice in Chains, Pantera, and Metallica. The technology powering this experience was revolutionary for IBM-compatible computers. While not truly three-dimensional, the engine used a clever trick where levels were internally represented on a two-dimensional plane. This allowed for features that Wolfenstein 3D lacked, such as altitude differences, non-orthogonal walls, and varying lighting. The lighting was particularly crucial, as it allowed the developers to use darkness as a gameplay element to frighten and confuse the player. The narrative placed the player in the boots of an unnamed space marine, popularly referred to as Doom Guy. This marine, one of Earth's toughest, had been transferred to Mars by the Union Aerospace Corporation, or UAC, as punishment for assaulting a senior officer who had ordered him to fire upon civilians. The UAC, a multiplanetary conglomerate, was conducting secret experiments regarding interdimensional travel on the Martian moons of Phobos and Deimos. The experiments went catastrophically wrong, destabilizing the gateways and allowing creatures from hell to swarm the bases. The game began with the Marine arriving at the hangar atrium on Phobos, tasked with securing the perimeter while his assault team went inside. Radio contact ceased, leaving the player as the sole survivor forced to fight through the complex to escape. When DooM was released on December 10, 1993, it utilized a shareware distribution model. The first episode, Knee Deep in the Dead, was uploaded to an FTP server at the University of Wisconsin and made freely available. This strategy encouraged players to copy the game to floppy disks and spread it far and wide. To continue the adventure, players had to purchase the registered version via mail order, which included the subsequent episodes The Shores of Hell and Inferno. This model was wildly successful, with estimates suggesting that the shareware version was installed on over 10 million computers within 2 years. The physical mail order version sold over 1 million copies. The game featured an arsenal of 8 weapons, designed to ensure that no weapon became obsolete. Players carried all weapons at once, encouraging a strategy of gun juggling to adapt to different combat scenarios. From the basic shotgun and chain gun to the devastating BFG 9000, the weaponry became iconic. Doom caused chaos beyond just moral panic. Workplaces and universities struggled as productivity plummeted, and networks crashed from illicit death matches, forcing bans during business hours. Simultaneously, the church condemned its satanic imagery. And yet, this infamy only helped define the genre. For years, every subsequent first-person shooter was simply labeled as a Doom clone. Following the massive success of the original, id Software released Doom 2: Hell on Earth on September 30th, 1994.
Doom 2 is just such a bigger, badder, better version of Doom.
Unlike its predecessor, this title was a commercial release available in retail stores rather than shareware. The story picked up immediately after the first game, with the Marine returning to Earth only to find it invaded by the Demon Army. The gameplay remained largely the same, but introduced a new super shotgun, a double-barreled weapon that became a staple of the series. Doom 2 featured 30 consecutive levels rather than separate episodes, and introduced new monsters like the Revenant, Mancubus, and Archvile. It also included 2 secret levels that paid homage to Wolfenstein 3D, complete with SS soldiers, which caused further legal issues in Germany due to the inclusion of unconstitutional symbols. These levels were removed from the German versions to avoid seizure. Becoming id Software's highest-selling game at the time, Doom 2 sold over 2 million copies. The franchise momentum continued in 1995 with the release of The Ultimate Doom, a retail version of the original game that added Thy Flesh Consumed, a punishing 4th episode that bridged the story between the 2 main titles. That same year, Master Levels for Doom 2 was released, compiling 21 levels from independent designers. In 1996, the content effectively doubled with Final Doom, a standalone package containing 2 32-level episodes running on the Doom 2 engine. This collection included TNT Evolution by the modding group Team TNT, known for its distinct soundtrack, and the Plutonia Experiment by the Kazali brothers, which is remembered for its grueling difficulty. The competitive aspect of the game was integral from the start. Doom introduced networked multiplayer, allowing 4 players to engage in deathmatch or cooperative modes. A database known as Competition was established to track speedruns, where players competed for the quickest completion times on the ultra-violence difficulty setting. Expert players discovered that they could exploit engine bugs to create shortcuts, completing entire games in under 30 minutes. One minor bug in the engine involved the teleportation behavior, where the altitude of a teleporting thing was not checked, a quirk that technical players noted. The sheer skill ceiling allowed for a thriving competitive scene that persisted long after the technology had been surpassed. As the game thrived on the PC, the franchise also made its way to home consoles, creating a separate but parallel history for the series. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES, received a port that, while lacking some textures and geometry, managed to capture the core experience. This version featured a modified timeline mentioned in its manual, placing the events in the early 21st century, specifically citing dates in 2021 and 2022. The SNES version also featured a censored ending where the decapitated head of the protagonist's pet rabbit Daisy was removed. Other consoles, such as the Atari Jaguar, Sega 32X, and 3DO, received ports that utilized a simplified geometry set, often removing certain levels or enemies due to hardware limitations. These ports were significant as they introduced the game to a non-PC audience, though they often lack the full fidelity of the DOS original. The console lineage culminated in a unique trilogy of sorts, starting with the PlayStation version of Doom. Released in 1995, Doom PSX, and later the Saturn version, combined levels from Ultimate Doom and Doom 2 into a single continuous campaign. It featured a completely new ambient soundtrack by Aubrey Hodges, colored lighting effects, and a darker, more horror-oriented atmosphere. This version introduced new sound effects and even unique enemies like the Nightmare Imp. It effectively acted as a bridge between the classic PC titles and what would come next. The PlayStation also received a version of Final Doom, which included a selection of levels from the Master Levels, TNT, and Plutonia campaigns. These console iterations established a distinct console Doom timeline, which treated the narrative slightly differently than the PC canon, often simplifying the transition between the events of Phobos, Deimos, and Earth. This divergent path led directly to Doom 64, released on March 31st, 1997, exclusively for the Nintendo 64. Doom 64 was not a port, but a completely new sequel. It featured entirely new graphics with larger sprites created from high poly-rendered models, creating a distinct visual style. The game utilized a modified version of the Doom engine, allowing for more advanced scripting, room-over-room architecture, and colored lighting that enhanced the horror atmosphere. The story followed the Marine returning to the planetary installations to stop a new threat, the Mother Demon, an entity that was resurrecting the decaying carnage of the previous invasions. The game removed certain enemies, like the Arc-Vile and Revenant due to cartridge storage limitations, but introduced the Unmaker, a powerful laser weapon originally mentioned in the Doom Bible. The timeline of the series during this era can be somewhat fragmented due to the various ports and manuals. The original PC timeline followed the Marine from Phobos to Deimos, then to Hell, and finally back to Earth. The console timeline, particularly through the Midway-developed games, presented a slightly different continuity. And that's why Doom 64 sits in a unique position, viewed by some as the true spiritual successor to the classic games, bridging the gap between the frantic action of the originals and the slower, more atmospheric horror that would characterize later entities. Regardless of the specific timeline, the core loop of fighting demons with overwhelming firepower remained the constant thread. As the 90s drew to a close, the frenzy surrounding the original titles began to cool. The game engine was getting old. However, the hunger for Doom never truly went away. In 2000, John Carmack announced the start of a remake using next-generation technology. This new version, called Doom 3, was first shown to the public in 2001 at the Macworld Conference and Expo in Tokyo. The new Tech 4 engine promised a huge jump in how games looked, using a special lighting system that worked in real time. This made for smooth animations and shadows that looked very real even on objects that were moving around. But this big step forward meant that you needed a very powerful computer. By 2002, players needed a top-end Radeon 9700 card just to run the game on high settings. A short gameplay demo shown in a tiny theater won many awards and showed off the game's creepy vibe. It featured a scary scene where a guard turns into a zombie, showing that the series was moving away from fast action to a story-focused horror feel. The plot was written by science fiction author Matthew J. Costello. It again follows a similar story of a Marine arriving at a research base on Mars in the year 2145, just as a portal experiment lets horrible demons start their attack. Doom 3 was released on August 3, 2004, becoming one of the top-selling games of the year alongside titans like Halo 2 and Half-Life 2. The game garnered critical acclaim, but it also sparked a divisive reaction regarding its gameplay mechanics. The most contentious design choice was the inability to use a flashlight and a weapon simultaneously, a mechanic that players referred to as the "no duct tape on Mars" problem. This forced players to choose between seeing their enemies or defending themselves, a deliberate design by id Software to inspire terror. Critics also noted the reliance on monster closets, scripted ambushes where enemies would spawn from hidden compartments. Despite the criticisms, the game's influence was undeniable. The new engine powered a wave of shooters, including Quake 4 and Prey. The narrative of Doom 3 was expanded in April of 2005 with the release of the Resurrection of Evil expansion pack. Developed by Nerve Software, this expansion introduced the Grabber, a physics-based weapon similar to the gravity gun from Half-Life 2, and brought back the double-barreled super shotgun. The Doom 3 era concluded with the release of the BFG edition in 2012, which finally addressed the flashlight complaint by allowing it to be mounted on armor. The franchise entered a period of identity crisis. A fourth main installment, simply referred to as Doom 4, entered development in 2008, but quickly fell into development hell. Early leaks described a game that deviated heavily from the series' roots, set on Earth with a cinematic style influenced by Call of Duty. Internally, the project was criticized for lacking the Doom soul, with fans nicknaming it Call of Doom. In 2013, the project was scrapped entirely, and a new team under Marty Stratton began work on a complete reboot. This second iteration, which would become the 2016 release simply titled Doom, aimed to strip away the slow horror of Doom 3 and return to the push-forward combat of the originals. Powered by the new id Tech 6 engine, the game promised a blisteringly fast 60 frames per second and a focus on movement as the key to both offense and defense. The narrative was rebooted to focus on the Doom Slayer, an ancient warrior awakened on Mars in 2148 to stop a demonic invasion facilitated by UAC scientist Dr. Olivia Pierce. Now, unlike the survival horror approach of its predecessor, the 2016 reboot empowered the player to be faster and stronger than the demons. Released on May 13, 2016, the reboot was a major success. It introduced the Glory Kill system, where staggering an enemy allowed the player to perform a violent melee execution that dropped health orbs. This fundamentally changed the combat loop, encouraging players to stay in the fray rather than retreat. The game also reintroduced the super shotgun alongside modern upgrades like the Gauss cannon. Fans loved the game and the now iconic soundtracks that accompany the rip and tear action perfectly. The success of the 2016 reboot laid the groundwork for a direct sequel, Doom Eternal. Released on March 20th, 2020, Eternal doubled down on the speed and complexity of the combat. The game saw the Doom Slayer return to an Earth that had been largely consumed by demonic forces. The narrative expanded the lore significantly, introducing the Night Sentinels and the corrupt Hell Priests. The gameplay was compared to a 3D version of classic Super Mario games due to its emphasis on platforming, introducing a grappling hook via the meat hook shotgun attachment, swinging monkey bars, and wall climbing mechanics. Doom Eternal introduced a strategic element to the carnage, often referred to as combat chess. Players had to manage resources constantly. Chainsaw kills provided ammo, glory kills provided health, and flame belch attacks provided armor. The game also featured empowered demons, enemies that had killed other players in their campaigns and would invade a player's game with increased stats. The sheer scale of the game was massive, generating $450 million in revenue in its first year. The single-player campaign was complemented by Battle Mode, an asymmetrical multiplayer experience where one Slayer fought against two player-controlled demons. The plot of Eternal followed the Slayer's fortress satellite orbiting Earth as he hunted down the Hell Priests to stop the consumption of mankind by the Con Maker. The story revealed that the Slayer was indeed the original Doom guy, found badly wounded by Sentinels and forced to fight in a gladiatorial arena before being imbued with superhuman abilities. The campaign culminated in a battle against the Icon of Sin, a Titan-class demon resurrected to consume the Earth. The expansion, The Ancient Gods, continued this narrative, taking the Slayer to the ocean world of Urdak, and eventually to the Dark Lord himself. One of the biggest turning points for the series didn't happen on a store shelf, but came from a bold move to let players look at the code itself back in 1997, when John Carmack released it for the original game engine on Linux. This pivotal moment opened the gates for the homebrew community. No longer restricted by the limitations of the original DOS executable, programmers could now modify the game's core DNA. This led to the creation of source ports, fan-made engines like GZ Doom and Doomsday that added modern features such as OpenGL rendering, high-resolution textures, and complex scripting, ensuring that the game remained playable on modern operating systems long after MS-DOS had faded into obscurity. The release of the source code birthed a cultural phenomenon known as, "But will it run Doom?" This question became a standard benchmark for hardware capability and a badge of honor for programmers. The answer was almost invariably yes, provided that the hardware had a display and a processor. One of the most creative examples of this occurred with a household thermostat. A YouTuber known as CZ7ASM managed to port the game to a Honeywell Prestige, a high-end thermostat equipped with a color touchscreen and an STM32 microcontroller. By utilizing a port of the open-source Chocolate Doom project, they were able to get the game running on the device, even connecting a gamepad to the thermostat's USB port to make the experience playable, proving that even home climate control systems were not safe from the forces of hell. Perhaps one of the most technically impressive feats involved running the game on an unmodified Nintendo Entertainment System, a console released a full decade before Doom and lacking the processing power to render its 3D environments. A modder known as the Rasteri utilized a clever sleight of hand to achieve this by cramming a Raspberry Pi single-board computer into a standard NES cartridge shell. The Raspberry Pi ran the game logic and injected the graphics output directly into the NES's video buffer. To the observer, it appeared as though the 8-bit console was handling the heavy lifting. A similar cheat was utilized by Michael Darby to run the graphically intensive DooM Eternal on a Game Boy Color. By placing a Raspberry Pi Zero W and a modern TFT display inside the Game Boy shell, Darby used streaming software to beam the game from a high-end PC to the handheld, allowing the 2020 blockbuster to be played on 1998 hardware. John Romero, one of the original creators who had departed id Software in 1996, eventually returned to the franchise that he helped birth to celebrate its 25th anniversary. In May of 2019, he released Sigil, an unofficial 5th episode for the original 1993 game. Distributed for free via his website, it featured a soundtrack by guitarist Buckethead and 9 new levels. Sigil was described as revisionist history, positing that after the 4th episode, the Marine was dragged into a deeper, darker section of hell. Romero continued this trend with One Humanity in 2022, his first Doom 2 level since 1994, and followed with Sigil 2 in December of 2023 to commemorate the game's 30th anniversary. The same year also marked a significant consolidation of the classic titles, with the release of Doom plus Doom 2. This definitive re-release, a collaboration between id Software, Night Dive Studios, and Machine Games, bundled all pre-Doom 64 content into a single package. Crucially, it included a brand new expansion titled Legacy of Rust. This new episode, described as Vasago's Rest, introduced new weapons like the Incinerator and new enemies, further expanding the official canon. This release also officially integrated Sigil into the main menu, acknowledging its place in the game's history. The narrative of the Slayer continues in the prequel titled Doom: The Dark Ages, released on May 15, 2025. Developed on the cutting-edge id Tech 8 engine, this title takes place 80,000 years prior to the 2016 reboot. It explores the medieval arc of the Doom Slayer, detailing his time with the Night Sentinels of Argent D'Nur. The game promises a shift in gameplay style, with a heavier, slower combat rhythm compared to the aerial acrobatics of Doom Eternal. The Slayer wields new, brutal weaponry such as the Shield Saw, a shield with a chainsaw edge, and a flail for crushing demonic skulls. The game also features vehicle combat, allowing the player to pilot massive Atlan mechs and even ride a cybernetic dragon. The reception has been largely positive, though there was some controversy regarding the inclusion of difficulty sliders. But most people viewed it as a way to add new experiences to your game replays. The music for this new entry is composed by Finishing Move Inc., marking a departure from Mick Gordon, whose industrial metal scores define the 2016 and Eternal eras. This change comes after a public falling out between Gordon and Bethesda Studio, and yet the identity of the franchise remains rooted in the aggressive, heavy metal influences that Bobby Prince established back in 1993. From the shareware floppy disks to the ultra-detailed renders in 2025, the journey of Doom is a reflection of the gaming industry itself. It began as a rebellious upstart that terrified parents and crashed networks, evolved into a technological powerhouse that defined 3D graphics, and emerged as the gold standard of the first-person shooter. It has been ported to everything with a screen, played by millions across generations, and modified by a community that refuses to let it die. Whether it is the pixelated corridors of Phobos or the high-fidelity plains of Argent D'Nur, the core appeal remains eternal: a lone marine and an infinite army of demons waiting to be sent back to hell. Thanks for joining us for the video. If you enjoyed it, you can like and subscribe.